If the American leader, which is by far the biggest part of NATO, has clearly signaled that, you know what, actually, we might not bother, it's a body blow to it. Now, he threatened to pull out.
Tim Marshall, what might an eventual possible Trump victory actually mean, do you think, for NATO?
I think it would be a blow to it, but not necessarily a fatal blow. But your previous speaker is correct. It's about tone up to a point. I mean, Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, does not actually immediately trigger that all 30 countries immediately go to war. They then meet and decide what to do. And so if the American leader, which is by far the biggest part of NATO, has clearly signaled that, you know what, actually, we might not bother, it's a body blow to it. Now, he threatened to pull out in the previous presidency and didn't, but what he successfully did was persuade a couple of countries to spend slightly more. Obama called us all freeloaders, but people loved him, so they didn't get cross. But shorthand, yeah, it'll be a blow to NATO if Mr. Trump becomes president again.
Sanam, what do you make of what might happen in terms of NATO? What this might mean for NATO if Donald Trump gets in again?
I mean, what we have to go on is his history, and he is a president or a former president that is a big pusher of the notion of burdens sharing. So he will certainly continue to push NATO members to increase their defense expenditures and their contributions so that the United States doesn't have to be the only player pulling its weight. Should that not happen, certainly I think a withdrawal is possible, a withdrawal to renegotiate the terms and conditions. I don't think it's going to be something that would be a zero-sum outcome. But I think this discussion is important, above all, for NATO members and Europe in particular to think about and prepare for the outcome of Donald Trump, rather than just be fearful of it and behave as if they're deer in headlights and not do anything about it. I think there needs to be a Trump plan. There's no guarantee or certainty that he'll become the next president of the United States, but there needs to be scenario building and preparation to get there.
I'm just reading this a couple of times. So this is coming from Politico. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Politico is reporting that Volodymyr Zelensky has invited Donald Trump to Kyiv on the condition that he stops the war with Russia within 24 hours, as he once promised. Tim Marshall, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's what he said last year. I think it was around about last November. He said, hey, look, vote for me. I'll stop this war within 24 hours, which would be difficult. And Zelensky I think he's slightly pulling his tail on that. But the serious point behind this is that a majority of Republican voters and a majority of Republican congressmen and women actually want to severely reduce the amount of American aid that goes to Ukraine, military and financial. And so if Mr. Trump is president, if then, as is probable, the aid reduces, at that point, Ukraine may have to go to the table under a very weakened position. And this comes all the way back to NATO, because at that point, in one wider sense, it's a defeat for NATO as well, in which case NATO again is weakened.
Sanam, what do you make of that?
I mean, I do agree with Tim's analysis. I would also just say that President Trump has a lot of bark, not a lot of bite. There's not a lot of meat on his bones. He promises a lot. He has delivered very little in the 4 years that he was in office. He promised to deliver peace, not just with Russia, with North Korea and Iran. And I don't think we got any of them.
That's a really good point you're making, because you remember before he came in, everyone thought, oh my God, the sky's falling, the world's coming to an end. And it didn't. Mr. Obama had much more kinetic activity, as we say, war, and had a lot more drone assassinations than Mr. Trump ever did. And, the world did not come to an end. It'll be bumpy, but it's not World War III, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, well, we're going to get on to World War III in a second, but I want to talk about what is happening in Israel and Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu has accused the US of advocating moves that would endanger Israel after the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said a pathway towards Palestinian independence was needed. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister said that the kingdom is ready to establish full relations with Israel if steps were made to recognise a Palestinian state. But Netanyahu said he opposes this in any post-war scenario. Zach Anders is a journalist reporting from Israel, spoke to John Pienaar on Times Radio shortly after he made the comments.
This is language that we've heard from his far-right government and the wings that support him, that brought him back to election last year, even before this war began, that they opposed, this bloc opposed any sort of concessions to the Palestinian cause, and that they would even break away from the current government and force another election.
Salam, I suppose it is no surprise that Benjamin Netanyahu is not keen on this idea of Palestinian independence. He's said as much before, but how do you read this this kind of clash between Benjamin Netanyahu and Antony Blinken?
Well, I think there are many dimensions to it. So this is not news. Benjamin Netanyahu has not been a partner for peace with the Palestinians for 20 years. However, Benjamin Netanyahu has pitched himself as Mr. Security. And one thing we have learned since October 7th is that the security platform policy strategy that he has pursued for 2 decades as on again, off again, Israel's longest serving prime minister has been ruptured. And not only does Israel have a domestic security crisis with its Palestinian neighbors in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, but it has a regional security crisis with Iran-backed proxies all around Israel's borders. So one should begin to really interrogate and question Netanyahu's success as a security prime minister. And this is about Israel's domestic politics. Post-October 7th, he's holding on for dear life. He wants to survive as prime minister and is looking to perhaps be a security prime minister going forward. But the Israeli electorate is still in a stupor after the trauma of October 7th, rightly so.
Okay.
They need to wake up and, they need to begin to interrogate how to manage security in Israel.
Tim, what do you make on the point of security?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Sanam said. And I mean, look, Mr. Netanyahu is yesterday's man. He's today's man. I'm very, very skeptical that he's tomorrow's man, because the intelligence failure that was part of October 7th is so great. I think there'll probably be an election this year at some point. They'll have to get over Gaza. I'm very concerned that there's a sort of 50-50 chance of some form of serious conflict with Hezbollah come the spring, but it may not happen. And once you get past that, they have to have an election. It's extraordinarily unlikely he'll win it. So yes, it's important that there's this rift with the Biden administration, but the next incoming government, I think, would be a unity government, and they would look at the potential, and it's not probable, but it's potential, two-state solution. And what the Saudis said is so, so important, because a Saudi-Israeli relationship is in both of their interests. The Saudis will pay to rebuild Gaza, but the price is you must approach a two-state solution.
Okay.
Can I come back on that really quickly?
Go on then, very quickly.
I just want to say that without what the Saudis are saying, an irrevocable Palestinian state at the end of some sort of process, this isn't a guaranteed.
Yeah.
So Israel shouldn't overestimate its ability to rebuild back with the Palestinians. And throughout this process, they're also losing support in the United States, if not in the international community. And I think that needs to be digested.
Okay, now listen, we only have 2 more minutes, I'm so interested to get your take on this. Western countries must prepare themselves for all-out war with Russia and conscription in the next 20 years. This is a top NATO military official. What do you think of that as a prospect? Can you see that, Tim Marshall, or do you think this is hyperbole?
Well, it's not hyperbole, because you can concoct the scenarios that lead to it. And it's not just him. Grant Shapps has been ringing the alarm bells, the defense secretary. The Swedish are talking about potential war within 3 to 5 years. What it is a recognition of how dangerous things are and how we need to prepare for the dangerous years to come. But I personally, and we're all guessing, do not see how all the bits fit together for World War III. The bits fit together for a very bumpy ride, as it has been for some years before the cycle ends. Doesn't have to end up in World War III.
Sonam, what do you think? Do you think this is going to happen in the next 20 years?
I mean, we barely know what's going to happen in the next month,
Yeah.
let alone 6. 2024 looks like a bumpy year. But I would just say the hyperbole is necessary to keep the public engaged.